So, what are these growth scores that some teachers and leaders will receive from New York State? And are they fair? Well, the New York State Education Department recognizes that if we only use 1 year of test scores to measure student learning or educator effectiveness, we'll not get the full picture we need and might, in fact, be comparing apples to oranges. As teachers, you know better than anyone that test scores don't tell the whole story about any student, and similarly, they don't tell the whole story about you or your effectiveness. But you can, and you do, influence student learning over the course of a year, and that's why growth scores are an important part of understanding teacher effectiveness. So let's look at how growth scores work. Meet Henry. Henry is a 5th grader in Mrs. Nyack's classroom at Greenlight School. Henry scored a 300 on the state ELA exam this year. Notice, we are using a scale score from New York's new Common Core state tests, so you might not be familiar with the scale yet. Now meet Anita. Anita is a 5th grader in Mr. Beamer's classroom at Woodland Elementary. Anita also scored 300 on the state ELA exam this year. Because these two students had the same score on the state exam, their teachers are equally effective, and this is a case of comparing apples to apples, right? Well, not quite. With growth scores, the most effective teachers are not necessarily the ones with the highest scoring students. What we want to capture through the student growth scores is how much influence Mrs. Nyack and Mr. Beamer had specifically on Henry and Anita's learning during the year. We want to measure how much Henry and Anita were able to grow by being in Mrs. Nyack and Mr. Beamer's classes compared to how much kids similar to them were able to grow in other teachers' classes. Last year, Henry scored a 690 on the state ELA exam. Anita, on the other hand, scored a 630. Since they have different starting points, they will not be compared to each other. Henry, who scored 690 in 4th grade, will be compared to the other students who also scored 690 in 4th grade. Anita, who scored 630 in 4th grade, will be compared to the other students who also scored 630 in 4th grade. You might have noticed that Henry and Anita's 4th grade test scores are in last year's scale, whereas their 5th grade scores are in the new scale. Although the scale changed, it does not impact how we calculate a student's growth or a teacher's influence on learning. This is because we are not simply subtracting the two scale scores. Rather, we look at how Henry and Anita did this year compared to students who performed like they each did last year. Let's take a closer look at Henry to see how this works. Henry is from an affluent background. He also has a learning disability, which makes reading a real struggle. So if we take Henry and place him with all the students who scored 690 on the exam last year, like he did, we see that some of these students got 300 on the new test, like Henry did. Some scored higher and some lower. But let's just look at all the students who, like Henry, are from an affluent background. Of these students, let's just focus on those with learning disabilities. Now we have a group of students who have a similar academic history and similar characteristics to Henry. They are considered to be similar to him. These are the students whose scores will be compared to Henry's. In Henry's case, his score this year is better than 40% of students similar to him. This gives Henry a Student Growth Percentile, or SGP, of 40. Mrs. Nyack, Henry's teacher, will have a Mean Growth Percentile, or MGP, that is the average of all her students' SGP. What about Anita? Anita is an English language learner and speaks Russian at home. Anita's parents live below the poverty line. If we take Anita and place her with all the students who scored 630 on the exam last year, like she did, we see that her score of 300 this year on the new test is about average. But let's just focus on the students who, like her, are English language learners and live in poverty. All these students have similar academic history and similar characteristics to Anita. Anita's score this year of 300 is better than 75% of students similar to her. This gives Anita a student growth percentile, or SGP, of 75. Mr. Beamer, Anita's teacher, will have a mean growth percentile, or MGP, that is the average of all his students' SGP. So what is the big takeaway about growth scores? In New York State, we're looking at student performance from one year to the next, not just a single point-in-time achievement. And we're only comparing the change in student performance to that of similar students. Apples to apples, oranges to oranges. This allows every teacher to have a chance to demonstrate effectiveness regardless of the different types of students in his or her class. What we just illustrated is a simplified version of the New York State model for calculating student growth based on state exams. Our model actually takes into account many more student characteristics which may impact how much students grow. This helps us see how a teacher's instruction influenced students' learning compared to how another teacher's instruction influenced the learning of similar students. So when you look at your state-provided growth score, it's important to keep in mind that it's only one part of your total evaluation. In that evaluation, the work that you are doing with your students day to day continues to be what matters most. For more information on interpreting your state-provided growth scores, please come see us at www.engageny.org.